Thank you to NOLA Mattress for the sponsorship. More about them later in the video. Not every place or period in time gets equal attention in historical retrospect. However, one place that has consistently beguiled historians and the general population for centuries is the story of a village in Massachusetts, Salem, which is now the modern-day town of Danvers. Salem Village was the scene of the deadliest witchcraft epidemic, which lasted a year from February 1692 to May 1693, with most of the executions taking place from June to September of 1692. It was a whole-ass moment in the early years of the colonies, where forces combined to gin up fear and hysteria, leading to numerous people in a small agrarian community being accused of witchcraft, placed on trial, and nearly 20 people executed as a result of these quote-unquote witch hunts. What happened in Salem Village, Massachusetts in the early 17th century that caused such a lasting impact still felt today? How did fear grip New England? What were the forces that conspired to create the infamous and deadly Salem witch trials? Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, cosmic horror author Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by James CJ, so be sure to show him some love in the comments as you deploy your like, subscribe, and ring that bell, and share this video. Let's get to it. Witch trials didn't start in Salem Village. They'd been taking place for centuries throughout Europe and British America in a period known as the Early Modern Period, which ran from 1400 to 1775. Of course, the origin of the witches date back much further, with the earliest known record being when they appeared in the Book of Samuel in the Holy Bible, believed to have been written between 931 BC and 721 BC. The story goes that King Saul sought the assistance of the Witch of Endor to summon the spirit of Samuel, the dead prophet, to help him defeat the Philistine army. By the end of the story, witches come out being condemned and seen as demonic, with an example being, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," from Exodus 22:18. By 1400, the hysteria surrounding witchcraft in Europe began festering. The accusation started, and many who were accused confessed, but only because they were often tortured. This got much worse between 1500 and 1650, which historians dubbed the Age of Witch Hunts. During this time, it's estimated that between 80,000 and 100,000 people were suspected of witchcraft, with many of them being executed as a result. The actual number of those executed is still debated. Estimates vary wildly between sources, but the number could be anywhere between 40 and 60,000 people, which is a lot. What is pretty well established is that the vast majority of those accused, tried, found guilty, and executed were primarily women, something shared with the later events of Salem. By the mid-17th century, witch trials had begun dying out across Europe, with the last known execution of a witch taking place in Switzerland in 1782. They started appearing more on the fringes of European settlements and American colonies. That's where Salem comes into the picture, but first, it's essential to understand the people of Salem and the early colonies, the Puritans. Now, if you want to get better sleep than the girls of Salem Town did, then you're going to need an extra comfy mattress, and that's where today's sponsor, NOLA Mattress, comes in. I tend to like having a softer mattress when I need to relax, and I also snore, so sometimes it's more than necessary to lay down in another room while wife gets her beauty sleep. We selected a full-size mattress for our guest room, and the one NOLA Mattress sent us is absolutely perfect. We had a long night the day before the mattress was delivered, and let me tell you, I wanted to pass out the moment my body hit the mattress. Best of all, though, is that NOLA Mattress delivers it right to your door with free shipping on orders made in the US. The mattress arrives rolled up in a box, and getting set up is super easy. It literally took 5 minutes to unbox and inflate the mattress and pillows before we were able to take it for a test drive, i.e. nap time.
I don't know, this is just how it ended up being. Do not question the director. No.
Alright, so, we have just now laid down on the mattress, and it is super comfy.
You can make the bed around me, right?
Yeah, totally. You're just gonna nap?
Yeah.
Alright, I think we're gonna keep it. The mattress is super soft and the pillows are incredibly comfy as well. We've had the mattress about a month now and we've got no complaints. NOLA Mattress also has a 120-night sleep trial that allows you to test your mattress out to make sure it's the right fit for you. I love NOLA Mattress and I think you will too. If you're looking to upgrade your sleep, head to nolamattress.com/geographics and use code GEOGRAPHICS to get an extra $50 off your NOLA mattress plus 2 free pillows with select mattresses. This is an additional discount on top of what is being offered on site, so check them out while you can. On December 22nd, 1620, the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock and began creating settlements there, with the two main ones being Salem Town and eventually Salem Village. Most, if not all, of these early settlers were Puritans, who were members of a religious movement that started forming within the Church of England in the late 16th century. Those two sides had sharp disagreements about practicing their faith. England was experiencing the period of Reformation when they broke from the Roman Catholic Church and created the Church of England. However, the Puritans didn't believe they went far enough to establish religious practice in the nation. They thought life should be lived in accordance with the Bible to the letter, with little room for religious freedom and wiggle room in its teachings. They had an intense belief in the devil's active presence in society, which underpinned their ideology of stricter religious beliefs, enforcement, and the roles of the ministry to guide them in shaping public opinion. Fearing persecution for their beliefs and, ironically, wanting more religious freedom, they left England for the New World, setting sail for America. A decade later, there would be a great Puritan migration to New England, which lasted for 2 decades, from 1620 to 1640. Starting with the arrival of the Mayflower. As mentioned, there were 2 Salems back in the late 17th century, Salem Town and Salem Village. Before becoming Salem Town, it was known as Namkeg and was inhabited by the Native Americans of the area. In the decades preceding Salem Town's development, the Namkeg people suffered immensely from wars between feuding tribes, a smallpox epidemic believed to have been spread to them by European explorers and fishermen, and then King Philip's War, also known as the First Indian War. These 3 events made it easy for the new settlers to establish the new town of Salem in 1629 on the Merrimack River. However, as more Puritans settled in the newly established town, some sought even more isolation and autonomy from a place that was evolving beyond their liking, which also wanted a more agrarian lifestyle, which is when they created Salem Village, roughly 10 miles from the growing port town. During the Glorious Revolution, the King of England, James II, was overthrown in 1688. Not long after, the royal governor Edmund Andros, who represented the crown in Massachusetts, was overthrown too in 1689. A result of these changes was a vacuum of power and the establishment of the 1689 Bill of Rights, which sought to create governments with a level of independence from the crown, which had been lacking up until now with figureheads running the colonies. It also created individual rights for the colonists. The Second Continental Congress stated in a resolve to the 13 colonies that their assemblies adopt such a government as shall, in the opinion of the representatives of the people, best conduce to the happiness and safety of their constituents in particular, and America in general. The region was in turmoil, and for 2 years, Massachusetts was left with a governor with no real governing ability, which helped others, such as the Mather family, fill the power gap. Increase Mather and his son Cotton Mather, along with other members of their family who were all ministers and academics in the area and heavily involved in politics. Increase and Cotton in particular stick out as they were early writers of witches and witchcraft, with both having written books and pamphlets on the subject, thus shaping the ideology of witches in Salem. Beyond the Mathers were 2 families, the Porters and the Putnams. The feud between the 2 families would envelop Salem Village, fueled by the beliefs and findings of the Mathers, and leave nobody safe from its consequences. Unlike the mercantile town of Salem, Salem Village was smaller, poorer, and more agrarian. It was made up of between 500 and 600 residents. By comparison, Salem Town was believed to have 3 times that of the village. While Salem Town and village didn't get along, the situation in the village itself wasn't much better. The residents of Salem did not get along. It wasn't a place where joy existed, and this is thanks in part to the strictness of the Puritan religion and the nature of the area plagued by feuds and social divisions. The most prominent family feud was that of the Putnams and the Porters. The Putnams were Salem villagers who, for 3 generations, had grown immensely powerful and obtained a great deal of land. The Porters were the equivalent of new money in Salem town, a family of maritime traders. These 2 families couldn't have been more ideologically opposed. The Putnams were as Puritan as it got, while the Porters, who represented Salem town in the same vein the Putnams represented Salem village, were more liberal in their religious beliefs and politics. The origins of their feud boiled down to 3 things, starting with the land disputes in terms of ownership and boundary lines. The other issue was around religious and political control of the area, with the Putnams wanting Salem village to have more religious and political autonomy from the town. This came to a head in 1689 when it was time to pick a new minister for Salem village. Thomas Putnam Jr. wanted a conservative to the letter of the Bible reverend, and his choice was Samuel Parris. It's unclear who the alternative was, but regardless, Putnam got his wish. Born in London, England in 1653, Samuel Parris moved to Boston in 1680 along with his 2 slaves, Tituba and John Indian. Over the course of a decade, he met and married Elizabeth Eldridge and had 3 children, Thomas, Betty, and Susanna. He became a minister and began acting as a guest and interim pastor for Boston churches until 1688, when he entered negotiations to become the minister in Salem village. In July 1689, he accepted the position, becoming Salem's official minister. Some sources claimed Parris gained a reputation as a greedy man, wanting more significant compensation and ownership of the parsonage, a church house provided to a member of the clergy. It's also believed that at various points his contracts weren't even formalized, likely due to an inability to come to any proper agreement. There was some belief that Parris would be asked to leave his position as Salem's minister. The Porters did intervene to cut his salary and take over control of local affairs. However, something happened that made Parris needed more than ever. An evil amongst them or a convenience, regardless, Parris was about to extend his tenure in Salem. So what was the linchpin? What started the belief that there were witches in Salem? It really starts with 2 young girls, Betty Parris, her cousin Abigail Williams, their friend Ann Putnam Jr., and Reverend Parris's slave, Tituba. Tituba's origins remain murky, with it being believed that she was either a Native American or of Caribbean descent. We don't have much information about her life prior to Parris in Salem, but her story is most rooted in the lead-up to the witch trials. Betty, Abigail, and Anne began indulging in the art of fortune-telling, and it was believed they'd been told of such practices by Tituba. At the time, Betty was 9, Abigail was 11, and Anne was 12. From January 1692, Betty and Abigail began showing signs of increasingly strange behavior. Things quickly got out of hand when the girls began experiencing fits, screaming, making odd sounds, throwing things, contorting their bodies, and complaining of pinching sensations and biting. Some historians have boiled this down to juvenile delinquency, and it's essential to understand the era. Children growing up in Salem village during the 17th century under a Puritan society were extremely repressed. They did not have fun, weren't allowed to talk, and weren't allowed to laugh. They were there to read, but not the fun kind, never the fun kind. No fun allowed, in fact. Do chores and just exist without being an inconvenience. Other historians and medical professionals believe that Betty and Abigail were experiencing some combination of various diseases, like encephalitis, asthma, epilepsy, Lyme disease, delusional psychosis, convulsive ergotism, and even child abuse. This strange behavior began to spread and was similar to what Cotton Mather wrote about in his 1689 book, Memorable Providences, relating to witchcraft and possessions, detailing a Boston family whose children had been bewitched. In February 1692, the Dr. William Griggs, seeing no medical explanation, chalked it down to dark demonic forces blamed on the supernatural. So if the girls were bewitched, who was the witch amongst them? The girls, facing pressure to name those who had bewitched them, named 3 people: Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. Good and Osborne were marginalized members of the community who didn't frequent church. Good was a beggar who was quick to anger, and Osborne was an elderly bedridden woman outcast due to her romantic affair with an indentured servant. As far as scapegoats go, they were the best choice for collateral damage. The three accused were brought before the magistrate, John Haythorne and Jonathan Corwin. They were questioned in front of the town with their accusers in the gallery showcasing the same signs that had brought about the allegations to begin with. Tituba knew that by denying guilt she'd likely face death, so she confessed to the crimes against her. It's considered likely she confessed due to beatings from Paris. Good and Osborne maintained their innocence, denying that they were witches. As a result, Tituba was spared and treated as an informer, and she began naming other witches in Salem. This only fed into the hysteria, which exploded from here on out. With the accusations, examination against Tituba, Good, and Osborne, the confession of Tituba, and her saying there were more witches in the village, it was official. The darkest year in Salem had begun. The governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, William Phips, intervened after the three accused witches were brought to his attention. He ordered a court of oyer und termine, which means to hear and to decide, to oversee the trials, with Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton presiding over a court of 7 judges. The accused defended themselves and were not given the aid of counsel. Spectral evidence was permitted, which was the claim that a person's spirit or specter could harm someone while they themselves were not present. This was often used as the only evidence to convict people and was problematic as it relied entirely on unverifiable visions. This went against a warning from Cotton Mather. He wrote to the court in Oyer and implored them not to rely on spectral evidence, but his words went unheard. On October 3, 1692, Mather's father, Increase, denounced the trials in Salem for the same reason, stating, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than one innocent person be condemned." The first person to be examined under the court oyer und termine executed for witchcraft was Bridget Bishop. She was hanged on June 10, 1692 in what became known as Gallows Hills. 9 days later, on June 19th, 5 more convicted witches were hung, with Good being among them. Until the moment of her death, Sarah Good pleaded her innocence while the other women accepted their fate. To make it worse, Good was pregnant at the time of her arrest. She was pardoned until her child was born. Unfortunately, after she gave birth to her baby in jail, the infant died prior to her hanging, making her indirectly the youngest victim of the witch trials as a result. Her 6-year-old daughter was also accused of witchcraft and imprisoned for several months before being released on bail, with the charges dropped, leaving her psychologically damaged by the whole experience. Tituba survived the Salem witch trials, but spent 13 months in prison and was only released when an anonymous benefactor supplied the necessary money for her bail. Rebecca Nurse was another of the women hung alongside Sarah Good. She was accused by Ann Putnam Jr., who became the most prolific accuser throughout 1692. Anne had claimed to see the specter of an old woman in her grandmother's chair, and her family encouraged her to reveal who it was. She named Nurse. It's been determined that her mother, Anne Sr., guided her to implicate Nurse. On March 24, 1692, Nurse was arrested. She maintained her innocence after endless questioning by Haythorne. She was thrown in Salem jail not long after. Rebecca Nurse was one of the few accused who got some support from the people of Salem Village, who petitioned her innocence with 39 members signing on. While she was not found guilty initially, Justice William Stoughton wasn't satisfied with the verdict because of something Nurse had said. In court, she'd stated after another accused, Deliverance Hobbs, had come to testify against her. "But she's one of us," referring to her being an accused witch. But Stoughton believed this to be that Hobbs was a witch like Nurse. When pressed on it, the elderly Rebecca didn't respond, and this was interpreted as guilt. As a result, the verdict was reversed, and she was deemed guilty. And she'd get another dose of false hope when supporters of hers turned to Governor Phips, who granted Nurse a reprieve. Unfortunately, her accusers, the Putnams, caused Phips to back down, leading to Rebecca's eventual execution. Rebecca became part of a larger story that claimed she was working with Good, Osborne, and another witch, Sarah Wilds, in the form of a coven performing a witch's Sabbath. These were midnight meetings of witches for the purpose of healing or harming people. They were being presided over by the specter of former Salem minister Reverend George Burroughs, who became considered the king of witches. Reverend Burroughs, a former minister of Salem Village, had been living in Wells, Maine at the time, where he'd been serving as a minister for 9 years. He was arrested and taken back to Salem Village to face trial with the court in Oyer, where he was convicted and executed on August 19, 1692. Giles Corey's death was particularly brutal, with him being pressed to death with stones for refusing trial. He lived just south of Salem Village on his extensive plot of land. From the outset, he likely looked as if he was enjoying great prosperity, but he wasn't a well-liked person in the area. He was close with the Porter family, and while he was a member of the village church, he had a reputation as someone leading a scandalous life. His third wife, Martha, was accused and arrested of witchcraft on March 19, 1692. Corey testified against his wife for reasons unknown, but did make an attempt to recant said testimony. But this raised the suspicion that he was a witch too. On April 19, 1692, a warrant for Corey's arrest was filed. He was accused by 3 people of witchcraft, along with his wife Martha, with one of the key accusations coming from John Putnam Jr. Upon his arrest, Corey spent several months in prison with his wife until his scheduled trial on September 16th. Giles, who had contempt for the court, pleaded not guilty but refused to put himself on the court, refusing a trial, believing they'd already declared him guilty. Which, to be fair, he was right. He was killed outside the Salem jail in the process of torture known as peine forte deux, which translates to hard and forceful punishment. The process was having a wooden board placed on his body with stones placed on top, weighing him down and crushing him. After 3 days, he was asked 3 times to enter a plea, but instead, the 80-year-old Giles Corey just responded with more weight. What a legend. So, how did Salem Village climb down off the ledge they'd created? Public support for witch trials wasn't easy to determine, but for those against it, many remained silent, living in fear that speaking up would result in their own possible trial. In general, support declined over the course of 1692. Governor Phipps went on to dissolve the court on October 29, 1692, after his wife became a victim of the damning accusation of witchcraft. The accusations continued, but the executions ceased entirely, with the last having taken place on September 22, 1692, with 7 convicted being hanged, including that of Martha Corey. In total, roughly 200 people were accused of witchcraft in Salem Village from February 1692 to May 1693. These accusations resulted in 30 convictions and 19 executions. In a village estimated to have been in the low 500s population-wise, nearly half were accused of witchcraft. The vast majority of the accused and executed were women who were seen as promiscuous, sinful, and easily susceptible to damnation. Puritans believed that while men and women were equal in the eyes of God, they weren't in the eyes of the devil, with women being easier targets of the devil's ways. Those who survived the witch trials and were released didn't exactly enjoy a great life, having to endure financial constraints, asset forfeiture, marginalization, a destroyed reputation, excommunication from the church, and various other penalties. No matter what the outcome of a witch trial, the accused suffered greatly in life and death. In 1711, some of those who suffered as a result of the witch trials were pardoned and offered compensation to their families. The events of Salem Village between February 1692 and May 1693 profoundly impacted the future of the judicial system. At the time of the witch trials, you were guilty until proven innocent. Today, we presume innocence until proven guilty, as long as due process is actually being awarded to people. It also affected things like spectral evidence, which we now refer to as hearsay. Cases like Giles Corey helped end cruel and unusual punishment. Another was the right to legal representation, which accused witches in Salem did not get. It's not to say the sins of Salem created such realities of the judicial system, but they certainly aided the case for the change. Come May 1693, Governor Phipps pardoned and released the remaining accused witches, thus ending the Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials were the result of personal divisions along the lines of ideology and power, but most importantly, it was the weaponization of fear. The events of Salem are a story about power and what people are willing to do to have it, keep it, and abuse it. The Putnams were at the heart of this insidious chapter, having produced the most accusations of witchcraft, and it's likely in an act of self-preservation that Paris helped create the scenario in which the Putnams abused. While over 3 centuries have passed, you can find modern examples of so-called witch hunts throughout history, including the 1980s with the Satanic Panic and the Video Nasties controversy. Consider the tenets of the witch hunts in Salem. They were predicated on fear, social divisions, religion, ideological differences, power, and other social factors. In the 1930s, Hitler used several such tenets to hunt down Jewish people and commit the atrocities of the Holocaust. In the 1950s, during McCarthyism, Senator Joseph McCarthy went on a crusade to expose suspected communists within the federal government, implicating many innocent people in the process. After 9/11, it was the fear of terrorists that targeted an entire religion. And today, well, I'm sure you can guess. In 2022, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., the last convicted witch of Salem, was exonerated of her crimes after an 8th grade civics class petitioned the court on her behalf. Not everyone during the Salem witch trials was a villain. Some were ordinary people trying to keep their children and families safe. But that fear that drove them, and this brief consequential movement resulted in people dying for dubious reason. Salem Village and the witch trials are examples of the worst parts of humanity, the fear and lengths we're willing to go to stop being afraid, and perhaps who we should really be fearful of. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a place we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who enjoys learning about history's most famous locations. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll get your little dog next time.